Back in July 2011, I just ended things with my boyfriend after nearly 3 years together. We'd relocated from Vancouver to Montreal, and the awkwardness of still sharing an apartment post-breakup was suffocating. We barely knew anyone in the city yet. The whole situation had me wound up tight. So when a classmate from my program suggested a weekend getaway to go hiking and fishing, I didn't hesitate. He'd grown up about an hour outside Montreal in a place called Santa Agate. Absolutely stunning area. Dense pine forests, rolling meadows, little streams cutting through everywhere. We chose to set up camp near a stream called Rivière du Diable. It runs close to some marshy areas where the fishing is apparently excellent. We pitched our tent in what I'm pretty sure was private property, definitely weren't supposed to be there, right up against this beautiful wooded area. We spent the afternoon fishing, talking about everything and nothing, sipping some decent local microbrews. Once dusk settled in, we got a small fire going and cooked up some corn and sausages. Honestly, it was exactly what I needed. We crawled into our sleeping bags around 12:30. We were sharing the tent to save weight. My friend passed out almost immediately, but I stayed up scrolling through my phone until maybe 2 a.m. Eventually, I must have dozed off, because suddenly I was jolted awake by this shrill yelping sound. I was disoriented at first, trying to figure out what I was hearing. The yelping just kept going, relentless, and my half-asleep brain decided it must be some kind of fox or something. I lay there listening for a bit, then went back to my phone, though the sound was incredibly irritating. I tried tuning it out, but it seemed to be getting progressively closer. Eventually, it sounded like whatever was making that noise was practically right outside our tent. That's when I started feeling genuinely uneasy. I'd encountered foxes before back in Vancouver, and always thought they were harmless enough, no bigger than a medium-sized dog. But what if this one had rabies, or could smell our provisions? I've always been an anxious person, so my mind immediately went to worst-case scenarios. I reached over and shook my friend to see if he was conscious, and thankfully, he was. The sound had woken him too. We whispered back and forth about what to do, realizing we hadn't packed anything to ward off animals. No air horn, no flares, nothing. Eventually, he said he'd aim his flashlight at it and make a bunch of noise to hopefully frighten it away. He pulled down the zipper, and I watched as he thrust the flashlight beam out into the black. What happened next is burned into my memory forever. His knees just buckled and he practically fell backward into the tent. The look on his face was pure confusion mixed with terror when he turned to me and stammered, "That's not a fox. That's a person. That's some fucking weird person out there." Under normal circumstances, I would have assumed he was messing with me. I'm easily spooked and refuse to watch scary movies. But I'd never seen that particular expression of fear on anyone's face before. I knew immediately he was serious. The bizarre yelping and wailing sounds continued, and looking back, it really didn't sound like any animal, but I guess our sleepy brains were trying to rationalize it somehow. He kept insisting I look out the tent opening, just to confirm I'm not losing it. By this point, my anxiety had completely taken over. My pulse was hammering, I felt sick to my stomach, but I had to see for myself. I carefully leaned forward and peered through the gap, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness. And that's when I spotted a male figure. He was positioned maybe 10 feet from our tent, rocking slightly side to side, wearing a trucker hat. But what made it truly disturbing was that he was dressed in women's underwear and a bra. That's when it hit me that something was seriously off with this person, as if making animal noises outside strangers' tent at 2 a.m. wasn't enough of a clue. After I ducked back inside, my friend and I frantically whispered about our options. We finally agreed to shout at him to leave. My friend started yelling, "Hey! You need to leave right now! We're trying to sleep!" The noises stopped immediately. Then we heard footsteps charging directly toward our tent. They stopped right at the entrance, but we didn't pause. We both started screaming, "Get the fuck out of here. We have phones and we're calling the police right now." At that, we heard him walk past the tent and head off in the direction of the road. Obviously, we didn't sleep another second. We lay there absolutely terrified until we saw the first hint of dawn. Then we packed up and got out of there as fast as humanly possible. On the drive back, we kept rehashing what happened, both of us pretty mortified about how frightened we'd gotten. It wasn't exactly our proudest moment. I think because we both felt embarrassed about letting some random creep shake us up that badly, we never really brought it up again after that conversation. So that's my story. I still wonder sometimes what that guy was doing out there in the middle of nowhere, or what his deal was. Part of me wonders if things might have gone differently if we'd been two women camping alone. I'm not saying he was dangerous, but it felt like he was testing to see who was inside. I'll never have answers. And honestly, I'm okay with that. This happened about 3 years ago. My buddy Jake and I were talking one afternoon about how we really needed to get back out into the wilderness. We're both pretty serious about camping and hiking, and we usually try to make it out there at least twice a month. It was mid-December in Pennsylvania, and anyone who knows that area knows the weather is a total coin flip that time of year. Sometimes you get these weirdly warm days, other times it's absolutely brutal. That winter was leaning hard toward brutal. Our girlfriends had been on our case for weeks about never inviting them on these trips. Honestly, it caught us off guard because Jake and I tend to do pretty rough camping in miserable conditions. We would always just assume they wouldn't be into that kind of thing. I mean, the worse the weather got, the more we seemed to enjoy it. Just typical macho nonsense. But truthfully, I was actually excited they wanted to come along. So we started planning a trip for that weekend. Saturday rolled around, and we were all loaded up and ready to escape civilization for a couple days. We headed west on the highway, driving deeper into the mountains for about 3 hours. The further we got from town, the more excited I felt, like I always do before a camping trip. As we got closer to our spot, I noticed the temperature dropping fast. Rain started coming down. It was light at first, but steady. I glanced over at my girlfriend Sarah in the passenger seat and could tell she was getting nervous about losing daylight and having to pitch tents in wet, cold conditions. Jake and I kept telling both of them not to worry, that we've done this a million times and knew what we were doing. Our camping spot was this scenic pullover area where you could park and look out over these massive mountain ridges. By the time we actually got there, though, darkness had completely swallowed everything except for some tiny, flickering lights from a distant town way down in the valley. If you've ever spent real time in the mountains, you know how fast night falls once that sun drops behind the peaks. The rain kept falling, steady and cold, and the temperature had dropped to right around freezing. Harsh wind gusts hit us the second we opened the car doors, and I watched both girls go from excited and chatty to quiet and clearly second-guessing their decision to come. Let me paint a picture of this spot for you. There's this faint little path that leads away from the pull-off, and then it just drops straight down this crazy steep scramble of boulders and loose rock. I would guess it was about 80 feet down to the bottom of the cliff. It's not any kind of official trail, more like one of those sketchy paths teenagers probably made sneaking down there to drink or smoke. You're definitely not supposed to camp down there legally, but we were young and felt invincible and figured we knew better. Getting down safely takes real concentration and time because one wrong step and you're looking at a broken ankle or worse. We always took it slow and careful. I pulled all my gear out and was ready to start heading down. Sarah and I walked about 50 yards from where we'd parked to where the trail started. We dropped our packs and stood there waiting for Jake and his girlfriend to grab their stuff. A couple minutes went by, then 5 minutes, then closer to 10. We just stood there in the freezing rain, getting colder and more impatient by the second. Finally, I told Sarah I was going to walk back and see what the holdup was. As I got closer to the car, I could hear them having some kind of heated discussion. I asked what was going on. That's when Jake's girlfriend told me, in this frustrated tone, that Jake had managed to lock the keys inside the car. Although he didn't do it intentionally, but you know how girls behave. Anyways, my heart sank straight into my stomach. Here we were, almost 10 o'clock at night, temperature hovering right at freezing, rain coming down, and we had absolutely zero cell phone signal. The nearest town was a good 20 miles away, down winding mountain roads. I felt this wave of frustration wash over me, because that was, literally, the absolute worst thing that could have happened at that moment. I walked back over to where Sarah was waiting and broke the news to her. She has this connective tissue disorder that makes her joints ache really badly when it's cold or damp, and I could already see her starting to grimace and shift her weight uncomfortably. I yelled over to Jake that we were going ahead down to the bottom to get a fire started because Sarah was clearly hurting, and getting her warm was my top priority. I told him I'd come back up in a bit to help deal with the car situation. Sarah and I clicked on our headlamps and started carefully picking our way down the steep, rocky slope. The rain was annoying enough on its own, but the real problem was the fog. It made the headlamps almost worthless, because the light would just bounce back off all that thick mist hanging in the air, creating this wall of white glow that made it nearly impossible to see where you were stepping. We worked out this slow, tedious system where I would carry some of her gear. She would climb down a section, then take my gear so I could climb down past her, and we just kept repeating that over and over. It was exhausting and time-consuming, but we were steadily making progress. We'd been at it for about 20 minutes, and were maybe another 10 or 15 minutes from reaching the flatter area at the bottom where we usually set up camp. Then Sarah said something, and the tone of her voice made my blood run cold. She asked what that thing was down there. I squinted through the fog and rain, following where her headlamp was pointed, and spotted what looked like a tarp draped over something. My first thought was actually excitement. I figured someone had lost a tarp in the wind, and now we'd have an extra one to use. I started carefully working my way over toward it. When I got within about 5 feet of the thing, something else caught my eye. It was one of those small plastic shopping baskets you carry around inside grocery stores, the handheld kind. There was stuff inside it that looked like candy wrappers and food packaging and general trash. I turned around to look back at Sarah, and her face had gone pale. She asked in this shaky voice if there was a person under that tarp. I immediately tried to reassure her there was absolutely no way that was possible. We were literally in the middle of nowhere. Ours was the only vehicle parked up at that pull-off. It was freezing and raining, and whoever this supposedly was didn't have any fire going, no tent, no camping equipment, nothing visible at all. We weren't anywhere near major hiking trails or roads, so it couldn't be some through hiker who had gotten lost. And there was nothing out here. No gas stations, no stores, no buildings of any kind for miles. Plus, who in their right mind could sleep on this steep, rocky incline in this weather? I kept moving closer to the tarp, planning to grab it, and prove to her she was just letting her imagination run wild. My headlamp beam swept across the tarp, and then the tarp moved. Both of us froze completely solid. I just stared, because my brain absolutely refused to process what I was seeing. It had to be the wind. It had to be my eyes playing tricks in the fog and darkness. I glanced back at Sarah, and she was already slowly backing up the slope. When I looked back down at the tarp, it started really moving. Not just a flutter or a shift, but moving like something alive underneath it was waking up. My heart started hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. I spun around towards Sarah and whispered as urgently as I could for her to run. But she was already going, scrambling up that steep, rocky slope with loose stones sliding and clattering under her feet. From somewhere below us, I heard this low, groggy moan. the sound of someone being disturbed from sleep, gravelly and confused. That sound shot pure adrenaline through my system, and I took off after Sarah, half climbing and half lunging up the incline. About halfway up, I stopped and killed my headlamp. I stood there in the darkness trying to control my breathing so I could listen. From down below, I could clearly hear the sound of rocks shifting and scraping. Whoever was down there was awake now. They were moving around. We'd woken them up. My mind started racing with questions I didn't want to answer. Were they going to follow us up? Were they hurt or lost down there? I tried to push down my fear and think rationally. I called down into the darkness, asking if they were okay, and saying we could help them if they needed it. But nothing, just silence except for the rain and wind. I called out again, asking if they could hear me. Still, nothing. Whoever was down there was deliberately choosing not to respond. That's when every instinct I had screamed at me to get out of there, and I turned and kept climbing as fast as I could. We scrambled back to the car and Sarah was crying, visibly shaking and completely terrified. I felt this awful guilt knowing I'd brought her out here. I was pacing around near the car, my mind spinning, trying to make any kind of sense of what we'd just encountered. Someone was down there on that cliffside, with no gear, no shelter, no vehicle, no fire, just lying under a tarp in freezing rain in the pitch darkness. Nothing about it made any sense at all. When we told Jake and his girlfriend what had happened, I watched the color drain from their faces. They immediately started panicking too. It made worse by the fact that we couldn't even get inside the car to leave because of those locked keys. The rain had picked up even more, and we all huddled together under a tarp, trying to stay warm and dry, while Jake walked around in circles, holding his phone up, trying to catch any sliver of cell signal. I kept my eyes locked on that trailhead, watching for any sign of movement, terrified that whoever was down there might come up. After what felt like forever, Jake finally managed to get a signal and called a locksmith. I don't even want to think about what he ended up paying for emergency service in the middle of nowhere at that hour, on a Saturday night. But eventually this guy showed up in a pickup truck. While he was working on getting the car unlocked, we explained to him what had happened. His whole demeanor changed immediately. He stopped what he was doing and looked at us seriously, telling us we needed to get the hell away from there and find somewhere else to camp. He said he'd lived in the area his entire life and started talking about unsolved murders and missing persons cases that had happened in these mountains over the years. Hikers who vanished without a trace. Hikers whose bodies were eventually found. The way he talked about it, quiet and matter-of-fact, made it clear he wasn't trying to scare us. He genuinely believed we needed to leave. He said something about how some people disappear into these mountains because they're running from something or hiding from someone, and those aren't the kind of people you want to stumble across in the dark. We didn't camp that night. Everyone was too rattled and spooked to even consider it. We just got in the car and drove straight home. The entire 3-hour drive back was silent, except for the sound of the windshield wipers and the rain hitting the roof. Nobody knew what to say. I still think about that night sometimes when I'm lying awake. I wonder what that person was doing down there. Were they hiding from the police? Running from something in their past? Were they just some incredibly tough but wildly unprepared camper who'd made terrible decisions? How did they even get to that spot without a vehicle? Why wouldn't they have at least built a fire if they were camping? They were just lying there on the side of a cliff, in complete darkness and freezing rain. I wish I could properly convey how remote and isolated that location was. It wasn't the kind of place where a homeless person could realistically survive for any length of time. Anyone who spends serious time outdoors will tell you the same thing. Wild animals are rarely your biggest concern out there. Other humans are the real danger. I'd heard people say that my whole life, but this was the first time I truly understood what they meant. The whole experience made me take a hard look at the mistakes I'd made. I never should have brought Sarah to that place under those conditions. We were camping illegally in an unmarked area, setting up in the dark, in bad weather, with no cell service, and no way to call for help if something went wrong. I'd been so confident in my own outdoor skills and experience that I'd never even considered the possibility of a human threat. If that person had wanted to hurt us, if they'd had bad intentions, nobody would have found us. We were completely vulnerable. I was selfish and overconfident and naive. So many things could have gone horrifically wrong that night. I don't set up camp after dark anymore, no matter how confident I feel about a location. And our girlfriends stopped asking why we never invited them on trips. I think they were perfectly happy to never experience anything like that again. We've never been back to that spot. Jake and I have talked about it a few times over the years, usually late at night around a campfire at some other location, and we always come to the same conclusion. We have no idea what we encountered that night, and we're probably better off not knowing. Last summer, me and my girlfriend went camping at some state forest in Pennsylvania. I can't really remember what it was called, but it was pretty much in the middle of nowhere. We didn't even have cell service, barely saw anyone else there. It was just us, and way too many trees. We ran into two people that day, and both of them weirded me out. First one was this lady, with her truck parked off the trail, hood up like it broke down. But she was just standing there staring at the road. She didn't look like she was actually working on anything. I'm usually the type to stop and help, but something about the whole situation felt off, so we just kept driving. Then there was this guy who kept circling past our campsite while we were putting the tent up. He was driving super slow and looking right at us. He did it like 3 times before my girlfriend even noticed. I pointed it out, and she got weirded out too. We went to bed around 10, and I figured we were good. Around 3 in the morning, this god-awful noise woke us both up. I don't even know how to describe it. It was like metal scraping on concrete maybe, or some kind of heavy machinery starting up. Just this loud grinding sound. It happened once, then stopped. Then it happened again closer. Then again, even closer. My girlfriend was freaking out, so I looked through the tent window but couldn't see shit. That sound kept coming though, and it was definitely moving toward us. I lied and said it was probably miles away because sound travels at night, right? But it wasn't. It sounded like it was coming from our trail. At one point, I'm pretty sure it was right outside our tent, maybe 30 feet away. I thought about making a run for the car, but then I thought, what if that's exactly what someone wants us to do? What if they're waiting for us to bolt? So I just sat there with the machete we brought, telling her it's fine, go back to sleep. She couldn't though. Neither could I really. Every stick breaking outside made us jump. It finally stopped after maybe 10 minutes, but I made us wait longer before doing anything. Then I told her we're packing up and leaving. We threw everything in the car as fast as we could. The moon was bright, so at least we could see without using a flashlight. While we're packing, I noticed an empty beer can by our fire pit. It wasn't there when we went to sleep, and we didn't even bring beer with us. We got the hell out of there and spent the rest of that trip at campgrounds with other people or just got motel rooms instead. I still think about what that noise was sometimes. Part of me doesn't want to know.